The morning sun rose over the quiet hills of Marbella, painting gold across the marble gates of the Santoro mansion. Beyond those gates sat an old man, gray-bearded, wrapped in a ragged coat, his hands trembling around a chipped wooden bowl. To the world, he looked like every other forgotten soul. But inside that wrinkled shell lived Leonardo Santoro, a man once ranked among Europe's richest. A billionaire who'd built empires, then vanished from the public eye. For 3 weeks now, he had sat by the roadside outside his own estate, pretending to be a beggar. No one knew, not even his only son, Adrian, the heir to his fortune, the man whose heart he feared was lost to pride and superficiality. The mansion gates opened that morning with their usual groan, and out rolled a black Rolls-Royce. Inside sat Adrian, handsome, refined, and cold. He barely glanced at the old man on the curb as the car slowed for the turn. Leonardo's eyes followed him quietly, a sadness heavy behind his disguise. He had watched his son reject every woman who approached him, calling them gold diggers or beneath his class. Now he had come up with a dangerous plan, to hide his identity, live among ordinary people, and find someone who would love Adrian not for his money, but for his soul. That morning, as the Rolls disappeared around the bend, a gentle voice spoke behind him. "Sir, you dropped this." Leonardo turned. A young woman in a faded white dress stood there, holding a loaf of bread. Her name was Clara, though he didn't know it yet, and that single act of kindness would change everything. She smiled, shy but warm. "You shouldn't sit here in the cold. There's a cafe down the street. They don't mind people who can't pay right away." For the first time in months, Leonardo's eyes softened. He took the bread and whispered, "Thank you, child. You have no idea how much this means." But in his heart, he already knew. He had just found the first spark of the plan that might save his son's life, and teach him what love truly means. Long before the ragged coat and the chipped bowl, Leonardo Santoro was a legend. The founder of Santoro Holdings, a global real estate empire stretching from Rome to Dubai, he'd built everything from the dust of his youth. By 72, he was worth over $8 billion. But wealth, he often said, is a strange kind of silence. It buys everything, except the sound of laughter in an empty home. His mansion, once alive with his late wife's piano and his son's teenage laughter, now stood like a museum of lost things. Chandeliers sparkled, but no warmth touched the walls. His wife, Elena, had died 10 years ago, gentle, wise, and full of the humility that first drew him out of poverty. She used to say, "The truest hearts don't shine, they serve." When she died, Leonardo saw her words begin to fade from his son's heart. Adrian Santoro was 30, strikingly handsome, and dangerously proud. Groomed in luxury, educated in the best schools, he had become the kind of man who mistook kindness for weakness and wealth for worth. He loved his father, yes, but from a distance, like one respects an empire, not a person. Their conversations had grown cold over the years. When Leonardo asked why he hadn't married, Adrian would shrug. "Every woman wants my money, not me." "And what do you offer them, son?" Leonardo once asked quietly. "My name," Adrian replied without irony. That night, Leonardo couldn't sleep. He walked the long hall of portraits, generations of Santoros staring down at him, and felt the weight of legacy like chains. He knew Adrian wasn't cruel, he was lost. Lost in privilege. Lost in image. So he made a vow, one last, wild attempt to save his son from the loneliness that comes with arrogance. He gathered a few old clothes, instructed his butler to keep silent, and told his board of directors he was leaving for a private health retreat. Then he disappeared. To the world, Leonardo Santoro went missing. But to himself, he became Old Leo, the beggar who sat near the gates of his own estate. Unseen, unheard, and finally free to watch the truth of people's hearts. A week into his disguise, he met Clara again. She worked at a small cafe nearby, one that smelled of cinnamon and rain. Each morning she served him leftover pastries, never asking for payment. Leonardo noticed something in her eyes. A quiet dignity, the kind that poverty couldn't erase. She treated him not as a burden, but as a person. And when she smiled, it reminded him of Elena. He began to ask gentle questions. "Do you believe rich people can be lonely?" Clara laughed softly. "Of course. Some of them are the loneliest people in the world. They just hide it behind tinted windows." That answer stayed with him, because she didn't know. She was speaking to one of them. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Adrian was furious. His father's disappearance had shaken the media. Headlines screamed, "Santoro billionaire missing. Foul play suspected." Reporters swarmed. Shareholders panicked. Adrian faced cameras with practiced calm, saying, "My father is resting. Please respect our privacy." But when the lights went off, his hands trembled. In truth, he had no idea where Leonardo was. And though he'd never admit it, the silence of the mansion was suffocating him. One night, unable to sleep, he walked past the window and saw the silhouette of a beggar outside the gates. A flicker of pity crossed his face, and then faded. He turned away. Rain fell softly that morning, the kind that whispered against rooftops and made the world feel like a secret. Leonardo sat beneath the olive tree near the gate, his tattered coat heavy with water. He didn't mind. The rain, he thought, made everyone look equal. Clara appeared again, carrying a small umbrella that had seen better days. Her white dress was damp around the edges, her shoes muddy from the walk. She approached him with her usual gentle smile. "Old man, you'll catch your death sitting here." "I've caught worse," Leonardo replied with a raspy chuckle. "At least the rain's honest. It falls on everyone the same." She laughed softly, and in that laugh, something stirred in him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Then, as they spoke, the black Rolls-Royce returned. It slowed at the curve, its headlights glinting through the rain. Adrian stepped out, umbrella in hand, frustration etched across his sharp features. "Father's friends won't stop calling," he muttered to his driver. "Tell them I'll handle the board meeting myself." As he turned toward the gates, he noticed Clara helping the old beggar stand up. Her fingers brushed Leonardo's sleeve. An act of pure kindness, and something in Adrian's eyes hardened. He walked past without a word, but his gaze lingered. The next morning, fate decided to play its hand. Clara arrived at work only to find chaos in the cafe. The manager, a stout man with tired eyes, was arguing with a supplier. A large delivery of pastries had been left unpaid, and the supplier threatened to call the police. Clara tried to explain that the owner would settle it by noon, but the man shoved the papers toward her. "You signed the last receipt, didn't you? That makes you responsible." Her face paled. She barely earned enough to feed her little brother and pay rent. A debt that size could ruin her. Then, a voice from behind them. "She said she'll pay. Give her till tomorrow." Everyone turned. It was the beggar Leonardo, standing in the doorway, dripping wet, eyes blazing with quiet authority. The supplier scoffed. You've got nothing." Leonardo stepped closer, his tone suddenly firm. Not like a beggar's, but like a man used to being obeyed. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "You'll have your money." The room went silent. The supplier grumbled and left, muttering about fools and beggars. Clara turned to him, trembling. "Why did you do that? You can't pay him." Leonardo smiled faintly. "There's more wealth in courage than in coins, my dear. We'll find a way." She stared at him, confused, grateful, and slightly afraid. That evening, as she walked him back toward the gate, a familiar car stopped nearby. Adrian stepped out again, holding an umbrella, this time curious. He recognized Clara instantly. Her soaked hair clung to her cheeks, her eyes downcast as she handed the old man half her sandwich. Adrian frowned. "You know this beggar?" Clara turned, startled. "He's not a beggar. He's my friend." "Your friend?" Adrian echoed, disbelief in his voice. "You don't even know who he is." Clara met his gaze. Sometimes you don't need to know someone's name to see their heart. For the first time in years, Adrian had no clever answer. That night, Leonardo sat by his small fire, thinking. He had seen it, that spark in Clara's eyes. Not pity. Goodness. He whispered to the shadows, "Elena, I think I've found her. The one who'll teach our son how to love." But even he couldn't predict how dangerous and beautiful this plan would become. Because the next morning, fate would make their lives collide in a way none of them expected. Adrian Santoro had never noticed the world beyond his iron gates. The cafe down the hill, the tiny bookstore beside it, the people who walked to work instead of waiting for chauffeurs, they were all invisible to him. Until Clara. For days after their brief encounter, her words haunted him. Sometimes you don't need to know someone's name to see their heart. He'd replayed them while signing contracts, while sipping champagne with executives, while pretending to care about quarterly returns. They echoed not as insult but as truth. So one morning, he did something entirely out of character. He left his mansion without his driver, without his suit. Just a jacket, sunglasses, and the restless curiosity of a man who'd spent too long behind glass. At the cafe, he saw her again, behind the counter, wiping tables, smiling through exhaustion. She didn't notice him at first. She was busy serving coffee to a few locals and quietly slipping a cup of hot chocolate to the old beggar sitting by the window. The beggar was, of course, Leonardo. His own father, watching it all unfold from behind a mask of wrinkles and dust. Their eyes met for a moment, son and father, but Adrian didn't recognize him. He only saw a frail man with a gentle gaze. Clara finally looked up. "Coffee?" she asked with a professional smile. Adrian nodded. "And maybe, whatever that man is having." Leonardo's lips twitched in amusement. "Hot chocolate. Bit sweet for you, young man." "Maybe I could use something sweet," Adrian replied, surprising himself. Clara chuckled. "That's the first honest thing I've heard all morning." That brief exchange became routine. Adrian began visiting the cafe under the pretense of work breaks. Each time, he found himself drawn into Clara's world. A world of simplicity, laughter, and honest struggle. She never complained, even when she worked double shifts to pay rent. She never sought pity. There was a quiet dignity in her. Something money couldn't buy and power couldn't imitate. And every evening, Leonardo sat nearby, quietly observing. He saw his son soften, the arrogance dimming just slightly, replaced by curiosity. One afternoon, when Clara left to run an errand, Adrian finally approached the old man. "You spend a lot of time here," Adrian said. "So do you," Leonardo replied. "I suppose I do. What's your story, old man?" "What's yours?" Leonardo countered. Adrian laughed. "Touché." There was something unsettling about the man's calmness. His eyes too intelligent for a beggar. But Adrian dismissed the thought. He had other things on his mind, like why he couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the soft eyes and fearless heart. A few evenings later, Clara invited old Leo to join her and her little brother, Samuel, for dinner in their tiny apartment. The smell of tomato soup filled the air, and the laughter of the boy brought a warmth Leonardo hadn't felt since Elena's days. Samuel looked up with innocent eyes. "Mr. Leo, why don't you have a home?" Leonardo smiled sadly. "I have one. I just had to leave it for a while, to find something I lost." Clara tilted her head. "What's that?" He paused. "Faith in people." She didn't press further. But that night, when she walked him out, she said softly, "Whoever hurt you, I hope they find their way back." Leonardo looked at her. Really looked at her. She doesn't even know it's my son she's hoping for. Meanwhile, Adrian's confusion was growing. He'd begun sending flowers to the cafe, and signed, and watching from his car as she smiled and placed them in a cup by the window. He wanted to speak, to confess his feelings, but something held him back. Maybe guilt, maybe fear of being rejected for who he truly was, a man who'd only now begun to see beyond wealth. Then one evening, he saw her walking home with the old beggar, both laughing softly under the streetlights. A strange ache tightened in his chest. Jealousy, sharp and irrational. Why does she look at him like that? Who is he to her? He clenched the steering wheel, not realizing how fate was laughing quietly in the background. Because soon, that jealousy would lead him to uncover a secret that would shake everything he believed. Jealousy is a strange teacher. It makes even the proudest men kneel before their own insecurities. And for Adrian Santoro, jealousy arrived quietly, wearing the face of a poor old man who seemed to know too much and smile too easily. For days, Adrian couldn't shake the image of Clara walking beside the beggar. The way she laughed, the way her hand brushed his arm, the softness in her eyes. It burned. He tried to reason with himself. It's absurd, he thought. She's just kind. It's what she does. But then came the whisper, that cruel whisper of pride. What if she pities him more than she respects me? That thought was unbearable. So one evening he asked his assistant Marco to look into the man. Find out who that beggar near the gates is, Adrian said casually, pretending not to care. I've seen him around too often. Marco returned the next day with a puzzled look. Sir, this might sound strange. There's no record of him. No ID, no shelter registration. Nothing. It's as if he doesn't exist. Adrian frowned. Everyone has something. Paper trail. Keep digging. He didn't know why, but the mystery felt personal. Meanwhile, Leonardo, still in his disguise, continued his quiet mission. He had grown fond of Clara and Samuel, often slipping small gifts through the kindness of strangers. A loaf of bread here, a bag of groceries there. Each paid for anonymously, each wrapped in humility. But the deeper he went into their lives, the harder it became to keep the truth buried. His heart was stirring, not with guilt, but with fear. Fear that, when the truth came out, everything he was building would shatter. One afternoon, Clara was late to the cafe. Adrian, who had happened to stop by, noticed immediately. She's not in today, Leonardo murmured from his usual corner. You seem to know her schedule, Adrian said coldly. Leonardo smiled faintly. When you care, you notice things. Adrian bristled. And what exactly is she to you, old man? For a moment, the cafe went silent. Leonardo studied his son, saw the storm behind his arrogance, and felt a strange pride. There was fire in him, passion misdirected but real. So he said softly, she's a light boy, one of the few left in this world. Don't ruin it with shadows. Adrian stared, confused, a little shaken. You talk like you've lived 1,000 lives. Leonardo smiled. Maybe I have. That night, unable to bear the tension, Adrian followed Leonardo after closing time. He trailed him through the winding streets, past the park, past the church, to the outskirts where the old man stopped beneath a flickering streetlight. Leonardo reached into his coat and pulled out something that caught the light. A gold watch. It was old, engraved. The Santoro crest shimmered faintly beneath the scratches. Adrian froze. He knew that watch. It had belonged to his father. Meanwhile, Leonardo, still in his disguise, continued his quiet mission. He had grown fond of Clara and Samuel, often slipping small gifts through the kindness of strangers. A loaf of bread here, a bag of groceries there. Each paid for anonymously, each wrapped in humility. But the deeper he went into their lives, the harder it became to keep the truth buried. His heart was stirring, not with guilt, but with fear. Fear that, when the truth came out, everything he was building would shatter. One afternoon, Clara was late to the cafe. Adrian, who had happened to stop by, noticed immediately. She's not in today, Leonardo murmured from his usual corner. You seem to know her schedule, Adrian said coldly. Leonardo smiled faintly. When you care, you notice things. Adrian bristled. And what exactly is she to you, old man? For a moment, the cafe went silent. Leonardo studied his son, saw the storm behind his arrogance, and felt a strange pride. There was fire in him, passion misdirected but real. So he said softly, she's a light boy, one of the few left in this world. Don't ruin it with shadows. Adrian stared, confused, a little shaken. You talk like you've lived 1,000 lives. Leonardo smiled. Maybe I have. That night, unable to bear the tension, Adrian followed Leonardo after closing time. He trailed him through the winding streets, past the park, past the church, to the outskirts where the old man stopped beneath a flickering streetlight. Leonardo reached into his coat and pulled out something that caught the light. A gold watch. It was old, engraved. The Centauro crest shimmered faintly beneath the scratches. Adrian froze. He knew that watch. It had belonged to his father. The next day, Adrian stormed into the cafe, eyes blazing. Clara was serving customers when he grabbed Leonardo by the arm. "Where did you get that watch?" he demanded. Clara gasped. "Adrian, what are you doing? This man, he's a thief. That watch belonged to my father. He's stolen from him." The cafe went silent. All eyes turned toward the trembling old man. Leonardo didn't resist. He looked up, eyes filled not with fear, but disappointment. "Do you really think so little of the poor?" he asked quietly. Adrian's voice cracked with anger. "Answer me." Leonardo sighed, removed the watch, and placed it in Adrian's palm. "Then take it. You've already taken everything else without even knowing it." Adrian faltered. The words struck something deep, but pride kept his voice hard. "Stay away from Clara. If I ever see you near her again." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. He stormed out, leaving the cafe in stunned silence. Clara turned to Leonardo, shaken. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" Leonardo smiled faintly. "Because sometimes the truth must burn a little before it can shine." That night, Clara went home in tears. She couldn't stop thinking about the old man's eyes, full of sorrow but not shame. Something didn't fit. And somewhere in the mansion on the hill, Adrian sat in his father's study, staring at the gold watch on the desk. He remembered how his father used to wind it before dinner every night. How he'd said, "Time is the only thing you can't buy back." He pressed his hands to his face. What if I was wrong? The cafe never felt the same after that day. The laughter was gone, replaced by whispers that clung to the walls like shadows. Clara moved through her shifts quietly, avoiding the corner table where old Leo used to sit. The chair remained empty, as though the space itself mourned his absence. Adrian hadn't returned either. Not to the cafe. Not to the hill. He had buried himself in meetings, in money, in motion. Anything to drown the echo of his own guilt. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget the old man's words. "You've already taken everything else without even knowing it." What had he meant? Why did his voice sound so familiar, so heavy with something more than insult, almost love? For Leonardo, the pain of those days cut deeper than he'd imagined. He had endured humiliation before, the scorn of competitors, the betrayal of business partners, but nothing compared to the ache of being condemned by his own son. He stayed away from the cafe, from Clara, from the gates of his home. He wandered the outskirts of the city, sleeping under bridges, blending among the forgotten. For the first time in years, he understood the full cost of empathy, how it demands not just compassion but sacrifice. He whispered often to the night, "Elena, was I wrong? Have I failed him?" Sometimes, he imagined she answered, "Not yet." Clara couldn't bear it anymore. One rainy afternoon, she searched the streets for Leonardo. She asked around at shelters, at the church, even by the riverbanks. Finally, she found him, shivering under a broken awning, coughing into his sleeve. "Leo!" she cried, kneeling beside him. "You're sick. You shouldn't be out here." He looked up, his eyes dim but kind. "I told you I had no home." "Then you'll stay at mine," she said firmly. One rainy afternoon, she searched the streets for Leonardo. She asked around at shelters, at the church, even by the riverbanks. Finally, she found him, shivering under a broken awning, coughing into his sleeve. "Leo!" she cried, kneeling beside him. "You're sick. You shouldn't be out here." He looked up, his eyes dim but kind. "I told you I had no home." "Then you'll stay at mine," she said firmly. She helped him back to her small apartment, ignoring the stares of neighbors. Samuel, her little brother, squealed with delight when he saw Leonardo and ran to fetch a blanket. As she warmed soup for him, she said softly, "You shouldn't have let him humiliate you like that." Leonardo sighed. "I've seen what pride can do to a man. Sometimes silence teaches louder than defense." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're too good for this world, Leo." He smiled faintly. "No. I just had to lose everything once to see what mattered." She didn't know what he meant. But the next morning, when she went to work, she left a note by his bedside. "If you ever need someone to believe in you again, you already have me." Across town, Adrian sat in his father's empty office, the gold watch ticking softly on the desk. The silence was unbearable. He opened the drawers, searching for what he didn't know. Then, buried beneath old documents, he found a sealed envelope addressed to him. His hands trembled as he opened it. "My son, if you are reading this, it means I've stepped away, not to abandon you, but to understand you. I've watched you build a world of marble and steel, but lose the heartbeat inside it. I hope one day you'll see what I see, that the greatest wealth a man can hold is compassion. Until then, I must go find a way to remind you what love looks like when it costs something." "Father." The words hit him like a hammer. He remembered the beggar's calm tone, the intelligence in his eyes, the way he said, "When you care, you notice things." Couldn't. He found Clara that evening, standing outside the cafe as rain poured down. "Clara," he called. She turned, shocked. "What are you doing here?" "Where is he?" "The old man." "Leo." Her voice hardened. "Why? So you can accuse him again? Humiliate him?" "No." Adrian's voice cracked. I think he's my father." Clara froze. The rain between them was the only sound. He continued, trembling. "The watch, the words, the way he looked at me. I read a letter. My father said he wanted to find love. For me. To remind me what it means to be human." Clara's eyes filled. "He's sick, Adrian. He's at my place. He wouldn't tell me who he really was. I just thought." Adrian didn't wait for her to finish. He ran. When he arrived, Leonardo was lying on the couch, pale, eyes half open. "Father," Adrian whispered. Leonardo blinked, confusion and relief flickering across his face. "So, you finally see me." Tears broke free. Adrian fell to his knees beside him. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I thought." Leonardo placed a trembling hand on his son's cheek. "You thought, as I once did, that wealth defines worth. But you've learned, haven't you? Love is not found in marble halls, my son. It's found here." He touched Adrian's chest. "In the quiet heart that learns to kneel." Adrian's sobs filled the room. That night, father and son spoke until dawn. Of life, loss, and the woman who had once tied their hearts together, Elena. Clara listened quietly, tears streaking her cheeks, realizing she was witnessing something holy. The rebirth of love between two men who had forgotten how to say it. By morning, the rain stopped, but the silence that followed was not empty. It was peaceful. Still, neither of them knew what storm awaited next, because the truth, once revealed, would not stay small. The world would soon discover that the missing billionaire had been living as a beggar all along. And love, once again, would be tested. For the first time in weeks, sunlight filled Clara's small apartment. Golden rays touched the worn furniture, the chipped window frame, the man resting on the couch, Leonardo Santoro, and the son sitting beside him, head bowed, eyes swollen from a sleepless night. Adrian hadn't left his father's side. He made soup. He fetched medicine. He wiped his father's brow like a child caring for a wounded parent. The hands that once signed billion-dollar contracts now trembled as they poured water into a glass. It was a strange sight, but a sacred one. When Leonardo woke that morning, he didn't speak at first. He simply watched his son. The way his movements had slowed, the arrogance gone, replaced by humility that came from the deepest kind of love, repentance. Adrian finally noticed his gaze. "You should rest." Leonardo smiled faintly. "And you should forgive yourself." Adrian looked down. "I don't know how." "Then start with gratitude," his father whispered. "Say thank you to the people who didn't give up on you when you didn't deserve them." He turned his eyes toward Clara, who was quietly folding laundry nearby. Adrian swallowed hard. "Clara," he began, his voice cracking. I don't know how to repay you. You helped a man you thought was nothing. And that man turned out to be my father. Clara smiled softly. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll see people differently from now on. I will, he said. I swear it. That day marked the beginning of their healing. Leonardo stayed with them as he recovered. And in that humble apartment, something miraculous began to happen. Family. He helped Samuel with his homework, shared stories of his youth, and often laughed with Clara over tea. Adrian, meanwhile, began to shed the layers of his old self. He volunteered at the shelter where his father had once stayed. He paid off the cafe's debts quietly, refusing credit. For the first time in weeks, sunlight filled Clara's small apartment. Golden rays touched the worn furniture, the chipped window frame, the man resting on the couch, Leonardo Santoro, and the son sitting beside him, head bowed, eyes swollen from a sleepless night. Adrian hadn't left his father's side. He made soup. He fetched medicine. He wiped his father's brow like a child caring for a wounded parent. The hands that once signed billion-dollar contracts now trembled as they poured water into a glass. It was a strange sight, but a sacred one. When Leonardo woke that morning, he didn't speak at first. He simply watched his son. The way his movements had slowed, the arrogance gone, replaced by humility that came from the deepest kind of love, repentance. Adrian finally noticed his gaze. You should rest. Leonardo smiled faintly. And you should forgive yourself. Adrian looked down. I don't know how. Then start with gratitude, his father whispered. Say thank you to the people who didn't give up on you when you didn't deserve them. He turned his eyes toward Clara, who was quietly folding laundry nearby. Adrian swallowed hard. Clara, he began, his voice cracking. I don't know how to repay you. You helped a man you thought was nothing. And that man turned out to be my father. Clara smiled softly. You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll see people differently from now on. I will, he said. I swear it. That day marked the beginning of their healing. Leonardo stayed with them as he recovered. And in that humble apartment, something miraculous began to happen. Family. He helped Samuel with his homework, shared stories of his youth, and often laughed with Clara over tea. Adrian, meanwhile, began to shed the layers of his old self. He volunteered at the shelter where his father had once stayed. He paid off the cafe's debts quietly, refusing credit. The employees whispered that he was changing, that maybe grief had humbled him. But the truth was deeper than that. He had finally found meaning. One evening, while Leonardo and Samuel were playing chess, Adrian found Clara in the kitchen, washing dishes. He leaned against the counter, uncertain. You must think I'm a terrible person. She glanced at him, smiling faintly. I think you were blind, but now you're learning to see. He nodded slowly. My father spent years building an empire, and I almost destroyed what mattered most in weeks. I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford. Now I see it's the only investment that never loses value. Clara stopped washing, looked at him, really looked at him and said, Then prove it, not to me, to yourself. Days passed. Leonardo grew stronger. His doctors were stunned at his recovery. But the truth was simple. He had found peace. He told Adrian, Son, wealth will test you more than poverty ever could. If you must lead, lead with kindness. The truest power is in mercy. Adrian nodded. I understand that now. Leonardo chuckled softly. Good. Then I can finally rest knowing you've become the man your mother dreamed of. Adrian smiled through tears. She'd be proud of you too. Leonardo looked away, eyes glistening. I hope so. One morning, Clara walked to the cafe and stopped dead in her tracks. The cafe door had a sign, under new ownership. Inside, she found the same tables, the same smell of cinnamon, but a letter waiting at the counter. For Clara, your kindness built a bridge between a father and son who had forgotten how to love. This cafe and the apartment you live in now belong to you. Use them to keep kindness alive in others. We will never forget what you've given us. Ellis, her hands trembled. She turned around and saw Leonardo and Adrian standing by the door, both smiling. She ran to hug them. "You can't be serious." Leonardo laughed. "I've never been more serious. Besides, I owe you a debt no fortune could repay." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "You've already repaid it. You gave me hope." That night, as they walked home together, Adrian stopped by the fountain under the moonlight. "Clara," he said softly, "I don't know where this path leads, but I'd like to walk it with you. No masks, no wealth, just us." She looked at him, eyes glimmering. "Then start by holding my hand, not your pride." He smiled, the kind of smile that comes when the soul finally learns to kneel. And he did. A year later, spring returned to Milan. The city's air buzzed with its usual rhythm. Cafe chatter, clinking cups, and soft laughter spilling into narrow streets. At the corner of Via d'Amore stood a familiar place, Cafe Esperanza. But it wasn't the same cafe anymore. It had become a small legend, not for its coffee, but for its heart. Clara ran it with quiet grace, her smile as warm as ever. Samuel was taller now, studying hard, sometimes helping with the customers. And Adrian. He was there too, often wiping tables, fixing machines, and stealing glances at Clara when he thought no one noticed. The billionaire's son had learned to live like a man of the people. And for the first time in his life he was happy. One afternoon, the air outside was electric with commotion. Reporters crowded around the street, cameras flashing, voices shouting. "Is it true, Mr. Santoro? Why hide your identity for so long? Are the rumors real, that you gave your fortune away?" Leonardo stood in front of them, looking calm, dignified, and proud. His silver hair gleamed in the sunlight. His eyes, once sharp with calculation, were soft with peace. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm Leonardo Santoro, billionaire, father, and a man who once forgot what love meant." The crowd murmured. He continued, "I disguised myself as a beggar to see if love could be found without a name, without power, without money. And I found more than love. I found redemption." A reporter called out, "What happens now, sir?" Leonardo smiled faintly. "Now I live, and I let my son choose his life, not inherit mine." The words spread like wildfire. By evening, every headline read, "Billionaire who lived as beggar, reveals himself." Inside Cafe Esperanza, silence reigned. Clara, Adrian, and Samuel watched the news report play across the tiny TV in the corner. Adrian felt his chest tighten. "He didn't tell us," Clara whispered. "He didn't want fame. He wanted truth." But as the reality sank in, the cafe door burst open. Customers poured in, journalists, curious strangers, influencers, all wanting a glimpse of the billionaire's son and the woman who'd captured his heart. Flashbulbs popped. Questions flew. "Clara, how does it feel to fall in love with a billionaire's heir?" "Adrian, are you two getting married? Is it true the cafe is worth millions now?" Adrian's face hardened. "This is exactly what we ran from." He turned to Clara. "I can fix this. I'll make a statement. But Clara shook her head. "No, you can't fight noise with noise. Let people say what they will. The truth will outlast their headlines." Later that night, the cafe was empty. Adrian stood alone at the counter, watching the reflection of the neon sign flicker in the window. Leonardo entered quietly, leaning on his cane. "You're angry," Adrian exhaled. "I just didn't want her to get dragged into this." His father nodded. "Love doesn't hide in the dark, son. It grows stronger when tested by light." Adrian turned to him. "But now everyone knows who we are. They'll never see her as anything more than the woman who saved the billionaire's heir." Leonardo's voice was calm, but firm. "Then show them what kind of heir you are. Show them the kind of man she helped you become." Adrian clenched his jaw. "And what kind of man is that?" "The kind," Leonardo said, stepping closer, "who proves that love, not legacy, defines greatness." The next morning, cameras once again filled the street. But this time, Adrian walked out of the cafe himself, no bodyguards, no luxury car. Just him. He faced the microphones and said, "My name is Adrian Santoro. Yes, my father is a billionaire. Yes, he pretended to be poor. And yes, I fell in love with someone who didn't know any of that." The crowd fell silent. He continued, "But what matters isn't who we were. It's who we've become. I used to measure worth by money. She taught me to measure it by heart." He turned, looked back at Clara through the glass window, smiling softly. "She showed me that wealth fades, but kindness never bankrupts. So if you're here for a story, let it be this. A man can lose everything and still win, if he finds love that sees beyond the mask." He stepped away, leaving the crowd speechless. That evening, as the world buzzed with his speech, Clara found him sitting by the fountain again, the same one where their story began. She sat beside him quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said softly. "You deserve to be loved openly, not in the shadows of my father's secret." She smiled faintly. "And now," he turned to her, eyes shining. "Now we begin, no masks, no names. Just two people who found each other when they had nothing left." The church bells in the distance began to chime. Above them, the sky broke into streaks of gold and violet, the color of endings and beginnings. Leonardo watched from the cafe window, a proud smile on his face. The experiment that began as a disguise had become something divine. Proof that even the richest hearts can learn humility, and even the humblest souls can teach it. Months passed. Milan bloomed into summer once again. Golden lights spilling over rooftops, fountains singing through the piazzas, and the soft hum of life returning to rhythm after chaos. At Café Esperanza, laughter once again filled the air. Children played by the window. Old men debated football scores. Clara poured coffee with her easy smile, and Samuel, now a young teen, managed the till with quiet pride. But there was one table that always seemed to hold a sacred glow. The corner table by the window, where Leonardo Santoro sat every morning, reading his newspaper, sipping espresso, and smiling at the life he helped rebuild. He had stepped away from his empire completely now. His name no longer appeared on business headlines, but in stories about kindness, legacy, and the quiet revolution of humility. He spent his days traveling to shelters, funding education for underprivileged children, and sharing his story, not as a billionaire, but as a man who'd once pretended to be poor and found himself richer than ever before. Sometimes, people asked him, "Do you regret it? Giving up your fortune?" He would laugh and say, "I didn't give up anything. I traded numbers for meaning." And when they asked, "How did you know love was real?" he'd smile faintly, eyes softening, "Because it stayed when everything else left." Months passed. Milan bloomed into summer once again. Golden lights spilling over rooftops, fountains singing through the piazzas, and the soft hum of life returning to rhythm after chaos. At Café Esperanza, laughter once again filled the air. Children played by the window. Old men debated football scores. Clara poured coffee with her easy smile, and Samuel, now a young teen, managed the till with quiet pride. But there was one table that always seemed to hold a sacred glow. The corner table by the window, where Leonardo Santoro sat every morning, reading his newspaper, sipping espresso, and smiling at the life he helped rebuild. He had stepped away from his empire completely now. His name no longer appeared on business headlines, but in stories about kindness, legacy, and the quiet revolution of humility. He spent his days traveling to shelters, funding education for underprivileged children, and sharing his story, not as a billionaire, but as a man who'd once pretended to be poor and found himself richer than ever before. Sometimes, people asked him, "Do you regret it? Giving up your fortune?" He would laugh and say, "I didn't give up anything. I traded numbers for meaning." And when they asked, "How did you know love was real?" he'd smile faintly, eyes softening, "Because it stayed when everything else left." Adrian and Clara, meanwhile, had built something far more valuable than the Santoro name. They worked side by side, turning the cafe into a small foundation, serving food, offering free meals on weekends, and hiring people who once had nowhere to go. The cafe became a symbol across the city, not of wealth, but of rebirth. Every evening, as the last customers left, Adrian would lock the door, walk Clara home, and linger by her gate. The same ritual, the same gentle tenderness that marked their love. He had proposed once, not with a diamond ring, but with a folded paper note that read, "For every mask I once wore, you gave me a reason to take it off." Clara said yes, not because of who he was, but because of who he'd become. Their wedding was small, held in the garden behind the cafe. White lights hung from trees, violins played softly, and guests cried freely. Leonardo stood at the front, his eyes glistening as he gave a speech that would be remembered for years. "I once thought wealth was something you could count, but standing here I see it's something you feel. My son is not inheriting my fortune, he's inheriting my lessons. And the first of those lessons is this: love will test you, strip you, humble you, and if you let it, it will save you." The crowd rose to their feet in applause. Clara wept quietly as Adrian kissed her hand, whispering, "You saved me." She smiled through tears. "No, Adrian, we saved each other." That night, under the glow of fairy lights and the scent of summer roses, Leonardo sat alone for a moment, looking at the stars. He thought of his late wife, her laughter, her patience, her dreams for their son. He whispered softly into the night, "I kept my promise, love." He found the one who would love him not for what he had, but for who he is. A gentle wind rustled the leaves, as if the universe itself answered, "Well done." He closed his eyes, smiled, and let peace settle deep within him. Months later, the Santoro Foundation launched officially, dedicated to the dignity of the ordinary. Its first mission, to support single mothers, street vendors, and young people who'd lost faith in second chances. And at the opening ceremony, Clara stood with Adrian and Samuel beside the ribbon, while Leonardo cut it with trembling but joyful hands. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed. But unlike before, this time the light didn't blind them. It illuminated them. As the sun set that evening, Leonardo walked slowly toward the fountain, the same place where his disguise had once begun. He sat there, looking at the ripples, the reflection of the sky. Adrian joined him, silent for a while. Then he said, "You were right, father. Sometimes you have to lose everything to see what you already had." Leonardo smiled, his eyes misty but bright. "And what do you have now, son?" Adrian looked back toward the cafe, where Clara and Samuel waved from the doorway, and said quietly, "Everything." Leonardo nodded. "Then my work is done." The camera pulls away, from father and son, the cafe's warm lights, the laughter of family, the hum of a city that learned a lesson from an old man's disguise. A voiceover echoes softly, Leonardo's final reflection. "We spend our lives chasing wealth to be remembered, but sometimes, the richest legacy is how gently we love."